So we got some more great storytellers, and Terri has been with us a couple times. This is I think her third time coming to tell a story. It's so incredible to watch a person get up on stage, nervous the first time to tell their first story, and then the second time they come back and they're even more comfortable and better, and by the third time they're like, "Bitch, get out my way!" And that's what she's like. So be careful. She's not like that at all. She's not like that at all. She's got a great storyteller. Please give it up for Terri Brzezinski.
That's good. Thanks. Hi. In my world, I imagine that all miracles come wrapped in special wrapping paper because miracles are gifts, and gifts usually come wrapped. I imagine that God has a large selection of different colored wrapping paper. Some of the designs are gorgeous, and they reflect exactly what the gift is that's inside. Sometimes the wrapping paper is a surprise because the miracle inside doesn't look anything like what you were waiting for. This was the case for me when I placed my order for the miracle of true love. I asked God for a man who was a gregarious kind of guy, the life of a party, a knight in shining armor riding in on a white horse to fight battles for me and to carry me off to great adventures. And then I stood on the corner and I waited a very long time. Love didn't come my way until I was in my 30s, and my biological clock was having regular panic attacks. I had exhausted all of the dating services, and I could tell the services were tired of me too. They were sending me matches from the bottom of the barrel and from galaxies far, far away. When I got matched with a guy from Anchorage, Alaska, I gave up. And then the gift of unconditional love arrived. Paul and I met playing volleyball, and I know it's not my skills that attracted him. When I played volleyball, my nickname was Wrong Way. I was told I moved around the court like a gazelle that had been shot 3 seasons ago. Paul's wrapping paper didn't look anything like what I had asked for. The design of the paper was randomly spotted with E equals MC squared and smiling faces because he was brilliant and an artful humorist. His paper pattern was sprinkled with Band-Aids and lollipops like the kind you get at the doctor's office because he was my skilled healer. It turns out I was the knight in shining armor in our relationship. Paul always used to call me his brassy babe. And Paul was my gifted medic. He always brought me back to life after every battle, and he would heal me and lift me up for the next adventure. His wrapping paper was also covered with wisteria blooms because Paul was a gardener, and the wisteria tree was his favorite plant. When we got married, we planted a wisteria tree in our front yard, and it grew and it seemed to flourish, but it wouldn't bloom. Paul made it his life's mission to get flowers out of that tree. He tried different fertilizers. He hacked at the roots like the Arboretum suggested. We even moved it to a new location behind the garage by a drainage pipe. Nothing ever worked. In all our years together, it never bloomed. But it seemed to give Paul great joy to keep trying, to keep nurturing and loving that tree, no matter what. He never gave up on it. And that's how Paul was with me, always nurturing, always loving me, no matter what. Paul wasn't exactly like I had ordered, but he was the perfect miracle for me, a glorious reflection of unconditional love. And that miracle produced 2 beautiful daughters and many adventures filled with joy and love. Then 10 years later, God gifted us with some miracles that we never dreamed of asking for. And this time, God's choice of wrapping paper wasn't beautiful or celebratory. I guess sometimes God chooses paper that can look disturbing or even terrifying. That was the case when Paul was diagnosed with the scariest kind of wrapping paper I could ever imagine. That paper was stage 4 colon cancer. The design on the paper was primarily large tumors. They were in his colon and all over his liver, the smallest one measuring 6 centimeters by 9 centimeters. The border of the paper was lined with repeating words in big black letters: terminal, 3 or 4 months to live. Terminal, 3 or 4 months to live. Shortly after Paul was diagnosed, he went online to fill out one of those Social Security disability forms. And when he typed in his diagnosis, one of these help bubbles popped up on the screen saying, essentially, stop. You're not going to live long enough to finish this process. Please call this number and we'll expedite your file. You know you're in deep shit when the governmental agency wants to expedite your file. The wrapping paper of cancer was absolutely terrifying. But when we unwrapped the gifts inside, we found the most amazing miracles of love and healing and restoration. There were so many times on our journey with cancer that Paul appeared to be at the end of the road. And then he would experience some kind of miraculous healing, and we were gifted with more time. Tumors would shrink, pain would disappear. Some days Paul would be a healthy shade of pink, and then other days he would be purple or yellow-orange, and then pink again. He was like a walking miracle mood ring, reflecting whatever healing process was going on at the time. Even the doctors stopped talking to us about prognosis. Our oncologist told us that with Paul, it seemed like anything was possible. The 3 or 4 months that we had been told that Paul had left to live turned into 3 glorious years. And when the end did finally come, it came fast. One day we were walking in sunshine, and the next we were watching Paul fill with fluid and turn orange-yellow. Suddenly we were back in the hospital. They drained almost 5 liters of fluid from his body. His liver and kidneys were failing, and Paul was fading in and out of consciousness. The doctor told me, "I'm not God, and anything can happen, but it looks like we're close to the end." When I left the hospital that night, Paul appeared to be slipping into a coma. I went home to tell the girls that it looked like our miracle of time was finally running out. We sat in the family room, and the girls looked so tiny and vulnerable on our big couch. I told them that the doctors think Dad is dying. It didn't look like he was going to get better this time. The medicine wasn't working anymore, and there was nothing more to do. And then we cried. We cried buckets of tears, sad tears, angry tears. My oldest cried, "This is too hard. Why is God doing this to us?" Both girls felt so fragile and unprepared for this. So I asked them, "What do you need to be able to say goodbye to Dad?" They said they wanted to be able to hug Dad one more time, not just flop on top of him. They wanted to really hug him, arms all the way around, and have Paul know that it was really them. I wasn't sure how this could happen. I didn't even know if Paul was going to make it through the night. I crawled into bed and prayed and pleaded with God, "Please give them one more time. Let Paul be conscious and have some clarity. Let them have one last good visit with their dad." The next morning, I took the girls to school because it was Mass Day and they both wanted to pray for Dad before they saw him. So I dropped them off and went to the hospital. And when I got to Paul's room, I opened the door, and he wasn't there. The sun was shining on an empty bed, and the covers were tangled into a nest, and the pressurized leg wraps were all akimbo and fully inflated. They kind of looked like a macabre balloon animal gone horribly wrong. The IV pole was standing stoically by the bed, and the bag was suspiciously unattached to anyone. I panicked and ran to the nurse's station, and I demanded to know what they had done with Paul. Where was he? The nurses didn't understand what I was talking about. No one had taken Paul anywhere. We all rushed back into the room, and then I noticed that there were drops of blood on the floor leading to the bathroom, and the door was closed. So I knocked on the door, and I tentatively said, "Paul?" And I heard, "Yes," as if to say, "Who do you think is in here?" And I gently pushed the door open, and there was Paul, leaning against the sink, shaving. He was barely able to stand, but there he was, getting ready for the day like it was any other day. He finished shaving, and the nurses reassembled him into his bed, and he ordered breakfast. And I ran to get the girls. And when we got back to his room, Paul was sitting up in bed, eating some yogurt and watching TV. And the girls had a wonderful visit with their dad. They talked about school and whose turn it was to take care of Houdini, our dog. And Paul admired the pictures they had drawn for him. Best of all, they were able to hug Paul with his arms all the way around them. And he said very clearly to each of them, "I love you, Sarah. I love you, Emma." And then the next day, Paul was gone. 3 months after Paul passed away, I was gifted with yet another miracle of resurrection. We were in the middle of having a horrible spring storm with high winds and a deluge of rain. The house was rattling and moaning. The drain pipe in the backyard had gotten clogged with something, and water was building up and threatening to overrun the back of the house. I was frightened and feeling alone and inadequate. I had my girls and a home to protect, but I didn't feel like a knight in shining armor anymore. The last thing I wanted to do was go out into battle without my medic to heal me. But it was only me now. There was no one else to slay this dragon. So I put on my rain gear and went out behind the garage to clear whatever was clogging the pipe. I slogged around in the muck and mud, my tears mixing with the rain, crying and railing at God and Paul for leaving me alone and afraid. And then I looked to the right at the back of the garage, and there was the wisteria tree, bending, not from the force of the wind, but from the weight of all the blooms that it carried. Paul's love had been resurrected in the wisteria flowers. He was still there with me, loving me, healing me. And every year since Paul has died, that wisteria tree has bloomed. It blooms with the promise of miracles, of hope, and of love yet to come. I always tell my friends that I argue with God about her choice of wrapping paper, but the gifts inside are always exquisite. Thank you.